The world doesn't need China. China needs the world. Can't we just all be friends? I'm going to dispel a few muddy ideas in this video, and I'm not trying to do it to hurt the feelings of Chinese people. I in fact love China and Chinese people. I mean, I'm married to a Chinese doctor, for goodness sake. My daughter is half Chinese. I have Chinese relatives, my in-laws, that whole extended family, all the friends I've made in China over the 14 years I lived there. So I have a soft spot for China in my heart, obviously. But the one thing that I don't have a soft spot for is the Chinese government, the CCP. I have no love for the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, I find them to be universally corrupt, untrustworthy, and underhanded. There's actually a fable, an ancient Chinese fable, that perfectly describes how the CCP treats the people of China. Jingdi Zhiwa tells the story of a frog that was born in the bottom of an old well. He would gaze up at the dim light, believing that this was in fact the sun. One day, a bird flew into the well and spoke to the frog. "Why do you not come up to the outside world where it is bright and warm?" The frog replied, 傻不拉几，你这个他妈的外国人，这是我们的中国，你不是中国人，滚回你自己的国家，中国共产党万岁，中国第一 which roughly translates to, "You are a fool. This that surrounds us is in fact the entire world." The CCP are in fact the people who put that tadpole into the bottom of the well in the first place. And if any frogs born in that proverbial well attempt to claw themselves to the surface, they are beaten and driven back to the bottom of the well, where they are tricked into believing that there is nothing better beyond the confines of this very restrictive well. Why do you think they censor the internet? Why do you think they censor movies and freedom of expression? Why do you think they censor religions and ban religions outright? And anything that is beyond the control of the CCP. It's to keep everyone in that well. So why does China need the world more than the world needs China? Well, we're going to have to look at a little bit of history, and don't worry, I won't get too much into it. I don't want to bore you. Whilst the modern Chinese government teaches all Chinese citizens to howl in despair about the 100 years of humiliation and how badly the rest of the world treated China, what they fail to mention is A, how badly Chinese leaders have treated the local people of China, going back centuries to the emperors and the dynasties and things like that. B, how much China, especially modern China, owes the rest of the world. And since we don't have all day, let's just go back to World War II. The Japanese absolutely kicked China's arse, 6-love. There's no denying it. Although each day on Chinese TV they attempt to convince the populace that Chinese farmers somehow destroyed entire platoons of Japanese devils with clever uses of farm implements, bows and arrows, kung fu, and AK-47s? Really? In actuality, it's almost too embarrassing to mention just how easily and devastatingly Japan was able to mess China up. I'm not discounting the fact that the Chinese people fought very hard, but it's an embarrassment.
As China's tragic struggle drags into its third year, we present these dramatic pictures from the Chinese side of an actual battle far into the wild and mountainous interior. China's army is ill-manned, ill-trained, and ill-equipped, but still it struggles on. At its furthest limits, Japan's invasion extends 1,000 miles from north to south, 1,000 miles from east to west.
Imperial Japan was a deadly and brutal war machine that caused horrendous atrocities, not only to the Allies during the Second World War, but especially to China. They kicked the shit out of China. I cannot reiterate this enough, but this tiny archipelago brought the proud country of China to its knees, and China was powerless to stop Japan. If it was not for the Allies literally nuking the Japanese into surrender, China would without a doubt belong, at least in part, to the Empire of Japan. China owes a huge debt of gratitude to the rest of the world, who not only saved them from Japan, but also sent aid and support to them during this terrible pockmark on history. And this is something that is completely looked over, hidden, and actively suppressed by the Chinese government. Just how much the rest of the world helped China defeat Japan, saved China from Japan. After World War II, the communists that had mostly hid out in the mountains, whilst the KMT, those are the guys who fled to Taiwan and actually formed modern Taiwan, they were busy fighting the Japanese, while the communists mostly sort of stayed back in the sidelines, waiting for it to all finish. So anyway, after the fighting was over, the communists came down from the mountains, took over and destroyed whatever was left of Chinese culture. I talk about this a lot. We all know about the Great Leap Backwards and the cultural devolution. So they proceeded to absolutely destroy what was left of China's rich culture and history and kill more Chinese people than the Japanese ever had. Again, the CCP, the same government that is ruling China today, is responsible for more deaths than the brutal Japanese ever were. Maybe those TV shows should replace the Japanese devils with CCP officials. And again, can I make this clear to you? The same government that not only is responsible for millions of deaths through famine and bad policies and all this horrible purging and stuff that happened in the past, but also the same government that was responsible for the Tiananmen Square massacre, and the same government that's responsible for modern day human rights atrocities like the concentration camps of the Uyghurs and persecution of religious minorities and whatever, there's a huge long list. It's like the Nazis. Just imagine World War II ended and the Nazis kind of just stayed in power. So, they did all these terrible things like the Holocaust, etc. But we kind of just overlook that. And we've still got the same people in the same government. Hitler's successor is now running Germany right now. We're okay with it. That's what happened with China. Mao Zedong, the evil turd, who many people say through misjudgments and miscalculations, but pretty much is responsible for the deaths of millions of his own people, tens of millions of his own people. It's the same government. His successor took over, and then his successor took over. It's the same people. It's as if Hitler's underlings had taken over Germany and we still kind of dealt with him today, saying it's all okay. It blows your mind when you think about it that way, but it's true. So because of this terrible purge and all the nonsense that went on with the communists when they took over China, China was pretty much cast back into the Stone Age. Intellectuals were purged, education went missing, and an entire generation of China was reduced to little more than an illiterate but loyal rabble who followed the CCP and its murderous leader Mao the Turd without question. Sadly, many good people died out, and a lot of China's moral fiber was essentially bred out of the population. Once the starvation and purges died down, once Mao the Turd died, things started to normalize a little, and China found itself in dire straits. No real industry to speak of, crumbling old infrastructure, and an unsustainable society living hand to mouth. Decades behind the rest of the world when it came to medicine, science, infrastructure, education, and so on. In 1979/80, the new leader of China, Deng Xiaoping, opened China to the rest of the world. What this meant was that China would now be able to interact with the rest of the world through special economic zones. Shenzhen was the first economic zone, and having lived there personally for 14 years, I saw what it was all about. In fact, when I first got to China, Shenzhen had checkpoints all around it, and you weren't actually allowed to enter the city unless you had permission or a residence permit. I was once told to get off the bus because I didn't have my passport on me, and I wasn't allowed back into the city after visiting a friend in Longgang. There were these big military checkpoints that all cars had to drive through. You had to get off the bus, walk through what looked like customs when you go into another country, and show all your papers to get through, because it was a special economic zone that was cut off from the rest of China. These checkpoints were eventually dismantled, but what this was all about was the fact that the CCP had for decades been trumpeting the usual capitalism is evil, the West is bad, sort of brainwashing rhetoric to the local population, but finally had to come to the harsh realization that if they were going to grow as a country, that they would have to betray their turd leader and embrace capitalism. But do it slyly, just like the CCP always does. Say one thing, but do another. So they opened up China to Western investment, gave offers hard to refuse, luring in international companies with tax breaks, cheap skilled slave labor, land lease deals, etc., that were just too good not to take advantage of. And while the money flowed in, they still, as they do till today, pulled the wool over the eyes of the locals, telling them that they are still a communist country with hammers and sickles all over the place. Worship of Mao the Turd. I mean, he's still on the money. They just kept that going. We're communist. We're this and that. Meanwhile, basically just doing capitalistic things to, improve the country, bring in the Western investment, sell products, that kind of nonsense. China owes a huge debt to all the foreign companies and individuals that invested in China and helped China grow. It was through the money generated, the technology stolen from these companies, the opening of the world to China's market, allowing cheap Chinese copy goods, etc., to come in, that China was able to transform into what it is today. The CCP did not do that. The CCP did not materialize money and technology. The hardworking and capable people of China were the magic ingredient that took the investment of the world and built China. And that's something where I want everybody to understand that this would not have worked anywhere in the world. You can't just open up a country and expect that people are going to invest. The draw that China gives, and the reason why your iPhone is still manufactured and assembled in China, is the fact that Chinese people are very capable and diligent workers, incredibly so. It's something I've witnessed with my own eyes. They've got the saying in China, it's called 吃苦, which basically means to eat bitter, and it means to overcome like really crappy odds and just keep muscling through like very bad situations. And this is something that the Chinese populace has had to do for centuries. Like I said, going back to tyrannical emperors and, the current government system that they still have today, which is pretty much the same as a tyrannical emperor. So what happens is you give them a task to do, you give them instructions on how to do it, and they will do it. They will find a way, they will work hard, diligently, and they're very capable and very easy to train in very high-tech skills. And this is why they have such a good high-tech industry at the moment. Anyway, the reason I'm saying this is it is actually the hardworking and capable Chinese people that have made China successful, despite the fact that their government has been holding them back all this time. It's kind of like the government tries incredibly hard to keep China down, and only when it lets China interact with the rest of the world, allowed Chinese businessmen and Chinese people to start to sell overseas and to accept foreign investment and trade and things like that, that China got successful. Because before that, the Chinese government was just suppressing the populace and telling them, be a communist and go and, harvest your rice or whatever it is and worship Mao and stuff, and China was going nowhere. So without the rest of the world, China would still be stuck in the past, a stagnant, larger version of North Korea. Now that China has been lifted up by the world and given a place, how does the Chinese government repay all those who helped? It strikes out, bullies, takes and destroys everything. Canada, Australia and other nations that helped China greatly, offering safe haven for those who escaped the terrible purges of Mao the Turd, that allowed every single CCP member to invest in property, send their children out of the hellhole that is Chinese education to study abroad, gave willingly and unwillingly technology and secrets to help China grow. They are being cast to the wayside. China cannot survive without the rest of the world, but the rest of the world can survive without China. Let the arrogant bullies know that if you want to be a part of the international community, that you have to behave, and that you cannot continue to behave like a schoolyard cry bully. I think it's time for us to it's time to stop the rhetoric here, guys. The current Chinese government, what they're doing at the moment, look what they're doing to Australia. Look at what they're doing to Canada. Look at the threats, the blustering, the chest pumping, all the nonsense, the wolf warrior, wolf turd tactics that are going on at the moment. It's time for us to send a clear message. We have to stop buying made in China goods. And this is not to hurt the people of China, but this is to teach the Chinese government to behave and to realize that it is the rest of the world working together with the rest of the world that has made China successful. China did not do this on their own. Unlike the CCP, I hope all of you guys have a wonderful week and stay awesome.